Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're watching this, maybe on repeat. Today we're looking at You Say OData. Of course, that's a musical joke about those who don't know whether to put the stress on the first syllable or the second syllable. Some of you will be saying OData, but of course it's OData for the rest of this presentation. Some of you know me, I'm a UK developer. I've been working with the Filemaker platform for quite a long time. I'm an MVP in our Claris Community, and since the last time I've seen a few of you, there have been some more grandchildren added to my roster. But I'm the kind of papa who loves to drive fast, and I do mean fast. Bit of a 40,000 feet view of where we're going to go to today. I want to give you, if you haven't touched this at all, a flying start, all the things you might need to know straight away. So feel free to, if you know this stuff, scroll forward for half of the presentation. Then look at some more advanced cases and a quick list of where to go to get some help. So what are you going to need to make OData work? A FileMaker server that is running at least 19.5.1, which of course now covers Windows, Linux, Mac, and it does also potentially cover FileMaker Cloud, although there are some things around the authentication with FileMaker Cloud that could in fact be a whole session on their own, and we're not going to cover that specifically today. What you need to do is to go into the admin console and turn on OData. Of course, you can do it using the admin API or command line, but turn OData on. And once you've done that, you'll now find that you have access to an OData log in the log files available to you. The next thing, once you've done that, is to go into a file, add a user account, give them a privilege set in which you go in and turn on FM OData. You are going to need to be familiar with insert from URL. You need a method to create some curl options. My preferred method is insert text, so you don't have to escape things and then just substitute later. And also the base64 encode function. What's the difference between this and the data API? First of all, OData works with basic authentication. The second thing is that the OData response is based on tables and not on layouts. This is quite significant. Now, the query and any modifications to that query are part of the URL string. It's basic authentication, it's based on tables, and everything that you're doing, with the exception of a create, everything's in the URL. OData is a server-side technology which can return data to you without anybody needing to know who the underlying data vendor is. So it's kind of agnostic. You can think of it, if you like, as ODBC over the web. It was invented by Microsoft in 2007, but it now sits in an organisation called Oasis who curate it. They've effectively handed it over to somebody else. There are already lots of embedded knowledge and potentially tools around Microsoft that integrate really well. Tools like Dynamics, Power BI, which of course come out of the Microsoft stable, really connect well with OData. And if any of you have been already doing any work with the Microsoft Graph API, then again, under the skin, what you're doing is talking OData. So we start with HTTPS and the qualified domain name of your server. And then the other thing you need is a file name. You don't need the .fmp12, you just need the file name. And then you modify that URL, either by doing a / and some words get a $, in front of them. That means interpret me as a command, not as a bit of data. Other things are regular query parameters, so it's preceded by a question mark. In terms of your curl options that you're going to need, we're going to start with a get. The authorization, as I said, is basic, and that auth string that goes in there is the base64 encoded username : password. That's all you need. It's a get, we want basic auth, and we're going to fire it off to a URL. And so we have the URL / metadata that says, just give me like the bare bones of what I've got. And surprise, surprise, first thing you're going to get back is some XML. And you didn't expect that, did you? The delivery mechanism back to you can be in XML, JSON, and in certain cases HTML to you. Obviously, for what we're doing here, we actually really want it in JSON. So we have to go back into our curl options and add one more parameter in the headers of accept application / JSON. And then when we run the query again, there you go, it looks like JSON to you and me. What in OData language is an entity set, what we call a table. As you can see there, it has an underscore added to the end of it. So if you want to use that in any way, to link it up to your FileMaker data, you need to remove the underscore. All I've done is say, tell me some stuff about what's in this file. In that table called awarding body role, there is a key in that table. And in fact, there are two keys. There's a field called unique ID and a field called UIDN, which could be considered as key fields. What that means is it's set up as unique, without modification. To do a simple query now on that data, we've got the URL precedes all of this stuff, and now we want to specifically look at a table. So we're going to go / and the table name, and then after that in brackets, so because I know that the unique ID is counted as a key, if I just put the unique ID, so a FileMaker get UUID, in there inside single speech marks, that says find me the record in that table that has that unique ID. It'll give you back the whole record, which in the end may not be quite as useful as you really think, but that's your first thing. It's your hello world. Can I get some data out of this? Follow those instructions, do that with a record that I know what the UID is. There you go, I've got some data. If I just want to grab one field out of that block of data, if I put / and a field name on the end of it, then I'm just going to get that single field from that specific record. If I further extend that by adding a / and $value, all that says is I don't need any of that other stuff. All I need is the value that's contained in that field for that record with that unique ID. A couple of interesting things to just divert for a moment about handling numbers. OData will return to you a number field of any length in the JSON. The problem that we have right now is that JSON get element is bound by the limits of the library that Claris is using, and so beyond a certain point you're going to end up with exponential notation and a loss of data. So the second key is a numeric key. If you just try and stick it inside the single speech marks, it'll fail because it's not a bit of text, it's a number. If you just put the number instead of the whole thing inside the brackets, it also won't work. So if you put inside the brackets UIDN, which in this case was the field name, equals this number, it will in fact treat it as the record key. The only thing here is though that that number is also bound by the Claris and JSON how big a number can you really deal with issue. We've got one field back. What if we want to get more fields back? $select. What I want to do is select these field names, a comma delimited list of field names. So instead of just getting back the one field name, now I'm getting back the contents of these 2/3/4 field names. For you to do that with a data API and modify that query, you have to have permission to go in to the file, go into layout mode, modify the layout that the query is running against by adding or deleting a field. And there may be some very good reasons why we don't want you to be doing that in the middle of the working day. Here, This is completely dynamic. Now I want to find a set of records that match some criteria. And in OData speak, this is called a filter. So I've got the whole set of records. I just want to filter it down. So we have $filter equals, and here's the filter. We can read this, it's in a weird order, but we can read this in English. Find me the records in this table where the accreditation ID starts with approved. And obviously if you put $select equals just this on the end of it, so we can kind of build the string up to say, but I don't want the whole record, I just want these two fields. So there's a bit of new language to learn here about how the queries work. It's all really well documented and has been for 10 plus years. So we have EQ for equals, not any for not equals, LT for less than, GT for greater than. So we can use, as well as using kind of words like starts with and contains, we can use comparators. If we tag on the end, order by, with a field, then this changes the sort order of the data that is returned to you. And a nice little tricky one is if you put in and $count equals true in the header of the data that's returned to you. So instead of having to take the JSON, run it through some kind of tricksy thing where you count how many things there are in the thing, it'll just give you a count of the thing in the first place. So then you can start working with it and loop through it. That just saves a bit of time, makes it less complex. So as well as being able to kind of search within a table, we can start extending that out to search across linked records. This is where I already know the keys, but I'm also effectively using the relationship graph. Much more powerful and complex is a thing called a cross join. So think of it like the first time you started playing with Execute SQL, you suddenly disconnected all of your tables, took out all of the lines on the relationship graph, because you could build on the fly a join. So I'll just talk through this example. So we want to join the student table and the engagement table, but we don't want to do a bit of filtering because we don't want all the records. So now here I have to, because I've got two records in the cross join, I have to preface which field with which table it's in. So where the student unique ID is the same as the engagement parent ID. So I've got a primary key relationship going on here. And where the student's surname is something, in this case Tucker. And then I'm going to use the expand command here. And so what I'd like back is, from the student table, please select me the surname and the own student ID for that student, but also from the engagement table, find me the engagement start date. So give me a list of people called Tucker and return to me their surname, their student ID, and the date we think they're starting. So we just talked for a while just about getting data. One of the next things you're going to want to do is to start to create some records. So we just point the create command at the table. This time we do have a JSON object in the body of the REST request, and now it's not a get anymore, it's a post. So post into this table this block of JSON. The keys are the field names and the values are the data that we wish to go in there. So now you're going to start to get something where you're going to start tripping yourself up if you're not careful. You have to be really careful about field types. Sending numbers into strings, sending strings into numbers, sending a number into a date. You'll get some kind of error back, but it may not be quite as helpful as you really want, and it may not point you to where the actual problem is. For instance, dates, timestamps are all sent as Zulu time. And while we can manage containers, again, there's a bit of a whole separate presentation there Containers are handled differently, and only a few MIME types are in fact supported, mostly PDF and some graphic types. Something interesting to put into your headers is there's a prefer header, and if you put in as a prefer header return equals minimal and you create a record, instead of getting back the whole of the created record, which may not be what you really want, because lots of data is passing backwards and forwards, and the data that's coming to you is of course metered in that sense. If you do return equals minimal, you get nothing back, but you do get a FileMaker 10 error saying no data. And in the headers you do also get a 201 as the likely result, not a 200, and that perfectly works. So you have to learn to kind of catch for 10 errors. But inside the header, hidden away, is in fact the row ID. So this is FileMaker's internal ID for the record that just got created. So you can create a record with a massive payload, get nothing back, go into the header, find out what the record ID is, and do a really simple query on the table that you just modified and made a record in. And just get back the unique ID so you can put it into this record that you're just currently looking at. Of course, things like deletes are handled, so instead of being a post or a get, it's now a delete. You can also patch a record, and interestingly, the patch will also work as a thing called an upsert, if you're familiar with that language. So if the record doesn't exist anymore, because in the meantime between you sending off the request, somebody else has deleted it, but actually the thing that you're putting in needs to be on a record that is somehow identifiable, it will create a new record with the data that you've just sent. Again, that just needs a bit of management as to how that works, but it does work. Even a single create could be transactional, but obviously a transaction we tend to think as a set of bundled things that all go together. Put something in here, create a child over here, create a child over here, do a thing over here. To do that, you need to create a multi-part batch. Now you can, as part of the headers, force this to continue. It may or may not be the desirable behaviour, because the point is for it to be fully transactional. You don't want it to continue. What you want is, if something fails, that you get back nothing's happened and it did fail. But there is a potential that there are times when you don't care in the same kind of way, and you can force the continue if there's an error. But you do need to pass what's brought back to you, because what comes back isn't JSON, it's a block of text. And obviously, because you're creating a batch file, you may be creating quite a large block of text to send to do what is a relatively simple task. OData can run scripts with passed parameters. Naming strategies are always really important. So things with a special character in them, or script names that start with a number, if that's your preference, don't do it, because OData won't be able to run the script. But the great thing is that when you exit a script, if you send any kind of results back, then you get the content of that script result back in a result parameter key in the JSON. What you see when you're running a script, if you have the admin console open and fire off a script, you'll see an entry for the script running with an FMSE type, and then as soon as it's finished, it's gone. There appears to be no other way, other than the fact that the calls are logged in the OData log, of seeing that somebody's just fired off something via OData. A kind of a big headline ticket thing, which sounds kind of really exciting, is you can, in fact, modify the schema using OData. So, don't let a junior dev have access to this, or even a senior dev who wasn't paying attention on the day that you talked about it. It's dangerous. However, once you've got over that, you can add a table to a file. You can delete a table from a file. You can add a field to any table. You have to tell it what type it is. It supports repetitions. Not everybody loves those, but it does support them. And there are some extra parameters you can add about whether you want this to be a primary, unique, global, the default, or if you're setting up a binary field, you can also give it the relative external secure path. You can therefore also delete a field from a table, but also you can trigger an index. You can now say, using OData, right, okay, I've got loads of stuff in there. Now I do want this to be indexed, and trigger the indexing. Let's just jump back for a second to the kind of beginning. No tokens, basic authentication. So no session management. Table based, not layout based. And all of the basic operations. Get me data, create data, delete it, update it, and scripts. So what can we do with the fact that parts of this is now simpler than it was using the data API? So one of the things I did in preparation for this was go back and look at some of the shortcuts that I have on my iPad, and started from scratch to build a new shortcut to do a simple query to some OData. Well, first of all, much more simple. Here it is. Or here's most of the steps. Very simple, go off and find a query and then just tell me how many records there are. So you could have a shortcut on the boss's machine that just says, tell me how many leads have come in today, because that's all they really want to know at that moment in time. You don't have to go and open Filemaker Go and go to a dashboard to be able to do that. It's just literally a shortcut. Run the shortcut. But in terms of thinking about development, what does data separation look like? It doesn't just mean I've got an interface here and the data's in a parallel file over there. It actually means separation of all kinds of data processes. The entry is here, but the data is living over there. But that entry could be FileMaker Client. It could be WebDirect. It could be any kind of JavaScript or website. And the file that the data ends up in, you now don't have to manage user accounts in. I have to have a user account for the file you've let me in, and I'm going to do some data entry, and I'm going to press save. The file that it's going into, it doesn't need an external data source to it, so that's going to make startup a lot quicker. And in terms of dependencies, it's reduced lots of them, because in the file over there where the data is, I only need the account for the OData account. So if I have a high turnover of staff, or I use temporary staff, well, I give them a username and a password to get into this data entry form, but I have to manage them in where the data is at all. And beyond just the separation of data, separation of function. I can run this script over there. I get the result of running that. I've sent it some JSON as a parameter. It can work through that JSON and go, oh, I need to run a script in file C. I'm in file A. I don't know anything about file C at all. I have no links to it. The only links I have are to file B, because I have a username and a password to it. And file B knows what the username and the password is for OData for those other files. Well, and in the middle of doing all of that, file B has logged what I asked it to do, logged all the results of what it did do, and then can give me back a composite result. I think there's some really interesting possibilities. Occasional edit is another example. We've got a table over here with 800 plus fields, a bunch of which are calculation fields, and I didn't create them. It wasn't me, obviously. The moment I go and kind of say I want to look at that record and I need to edit 2 fields in that record, the amount of data that's being transferred to me as the client, we know is quite large. And if it's got calculated data that's unstored, it's got to do a whole bunch of work. So what if I do an OData query saying, can I just have these 5 fields from that record, please? Bring it into a local file. So for the user, occasional edit becomes significantly faster because they're not bothered. Where's the data live? I don't care. My job is to grab this, do this, click save, it's all done. First place to look for help is inside the FileMaker help docs. The OData guide is very good, but you can go look at the specs for OData. You can look at what Microsoft think it's all about, and on odata.org there are some tutorials, which includes a whole load of sample data. So thank you for being here. Hope you found it useful. I hope you found at least one thing that you've learned that you didn't know prior to today. But mostly I want to have given you confidence that this is something that isn't that difficult. There's a bit to learn, but it absolutely works, and it is worth beginning to explore how this might modify your method of doing programming in FileMaker. But for now, thank you very much for being here.